Now, it's time on the programme for today's perspective, and it is 20 years to the day, in fact, since the former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet was arrested for human rights violations. He was arrested, of course, in Britain, a landmark case at the time. The first time, in fact, that a former government head had been arrested on the principle of universal jurisdiction. Now, it's a case that has shaped others, and many say marked the beginning, really, of the end of impunity for powerful former heads of state. My guest today is Reed Brody. He's an American human rights lawyer who at the time, in fact, directed Human Rights Watch's participation in the Pinochet case. He's been working on a series of other cases ever since. Brody even nicknamed the dictator hunter. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. Good to have you with us. Take us back, first of all, to that time 20 years ago, the arrest of Pinochet. I mean, what was it like to be involved at the time, and how groundbreaking a moment do you think it was?
Well, this was incredibly important. It took place a couple of months after the International Criminal Court was established in Rome. Pinochet had been the dictator of Chile for 17 years, synonymous with repression, human rights abuse. He left power in 1990 after a referendum that was imposed on him by the international community, but before he left power, he granted himself an amnesty. He had senatorial immunity. He erected several walls that prevented him from being prosecuted in Chile, even though a majority of Chileans wanted him to be prosecuted. So victims and lawyers acting on their behalf filed cases in Spain in the name of universal jurisdiction. And they were being investigated by Judge Baltasar Garzón. And when Garzón heard that Pinochet was visiting London, he sent an arrest warrant. Margaret Thatcher had been in power each time Pinochet had visited London, but now she was no longer in power. And the new government of Tony Blair allowed the arrest to go forward. Pinochet challenged his arrest before the House of Lords, said, "You can't arrest me, I'm a former head of state." And in two decisions that have echoes down to today, the House of Lords said no. Under international law, under the UN Torture Convention, even if you're a former head of state, you can be arrested and prosecuted anywhere in the world.
So that must have been so exciting a moment for people like yourself.
It was, it was a moment of effervescence in the human rights community. Not only was this the iconic dictator who was brought, who was being held to account, but it was because victims had filed complaints. This was something we could do. This wasn't the International Criminal Court. This wasn't the United Nations. This is something victims could do. And so, we began to get approached all over the world by people who wanted to do what the Pinochet's victims had done. And that's how I got involved, particularly in the case of Hissène Habré, the former dictator of Chad. It took 17 years, but he was prosecuted in Senegal and convicted of crimes against humanity. And what's exciting about this precedent is that it's open to activists, particularly to victims. And so just as the Hissène Habré's victims said, we want to do what Pinochet's victims did, now victims groups all over Africa are saying, we want to do what Hissène Habré's victims did.
And why do you think it's so important? I mean, even if a case is very old, why is it so important to those victims and to others as well to continue that and really push for prosecutions or whatever the case might be?
No victim will ever give up finding out and trying to achieve justice when their parents were killed, when they came out of jail. It's not the passage of time does not heal that. And what's exciting about these cases is that, Hissène Habré is not in jail only because, an international court wanted him. He's there because activists, people who came out of jail, said, we are not giving up. We are going to fight for justice. And that is transformative of the relationship, I believe, between leaders and the people who they govern.
I noticed just a moment ago you mentioned Africa. I mean, there's been quite a lot of criticism, for example, of the International Criminal Court, which is obviously doing a lot of this work nowadays, for specifically targeting, in critics' views, the African countries for these kind of prosecutions. How would you respond to that? Is it going in the right way?
Well, I think the International Criminal Court has been too focused on Africa, not because the cases in Africa don't merit its focus, but there are cases other places in the world, and obviously there are political obstacles, and the court is a court that doesn't have jurisdiction over countries that have not ratified the treaty. The current prosecutor is looking into Afghanistan, including potential CIA crimes in Afghanistan. She's looking at crimes in Gaza. She's looking at Venezuela. So I think the current prosecutor has taken that, who is African herself, has taken that criticism on board. But these two pillars of justice go in the same direction. The institutional, the ICC, international tribunals, and victim-propelled cases like Pinochet, Hissin Habre, Rios Montt in Guatemala. There are many, many of them around the world.
And that's right, is it? I mean, you mentioned the US there. Obviously, Donald Trump and John Bolton as well have been saying things, criticising the International Criminal Court just in the last few weeks.
Well, of course, the United States, even before John Bolton, has generally taken the position that the U.S. national interest is best protected by being the biggest bully, the strongest country on the block, not by having all countries adhere to principles of international law. That's unfortunate, but it's not new under John Bolton.
Where does this come from in you? I mean, I know that you're the son of a Holocaust survivor, for example. I mean, is that part of it? Do you think that's where you get your passion for this from?
Certainly my parents' history. My father served in German labor camps in World War II. I've spent a lot of time working in Haiti in particular, where I saw how much the impunity, how throughout Haitian history, a small elite has been able to rob and to kill and to murder with complete impunity, and how that destroys a society. In fact, one of my first jobs in this field was working for the Haitian government, trying to bring to justice people who committed crimes during the coup period. And I saw what that can do when victims are involved in the struggle for justice.
Good to have you with us on the programme today. Good to hear your views, and good to hear that, in your view anyway, that fight should continue as well. Reed Brody, thanks very much for being with us.
You're quite welcome.
Today on France 24. Let's bring up